Hi! In this video, I'll show how to make this kind of gradient effect in DaVinci Resolve. If you are in a hurry and do not want to waste time watching the whole video, give me just a few seconds of your attention. First of all, you can grab the project files for all three setups shown here. I put links in the description so you can explore and play with the projects yourself. Second, there is a simple and short answer for how to create these types of gradients. Texture node. Here you put a red and green map, and here goes a colorful gradient. And that's it. Now let's talk about it in more detail. Usually when you want to create a colorful gradient, you use a monochrome map and a specific node. It may be fast noise or one of the macros shared online. I use my own solution, a macro called GradientColor. It is based on the custom tool, and if I remember correctly, I made it because I needed to work with transparency as well. If you still do not have a similar macro, you can use mine. I share it for free as part of a small pack. The link can be found in the description. There is also a paid version, which has one extra control in this macro. When you choose repeat or ping pong, the extra control appears and allows you to repeat the gradient several times. Getting back to our topic, these types of gradients are linear. They take one channel as a map, in this case it's luminance, and apply color based on the value a pixel has. A value of 0, meaning black, gets the color from the far left side of the gradient. A value of 1, meaning white in the map, gets the color from the far right side of the gradient. Values in between are distributed accordingly. But that's not what happens here. Even if we try to apply similar colors, we can't get the same result. Because instead of working with one channel, the texture node needs two, specifically the red and green channels. And instead of a linear gradient, it uses the entire canvas with X and Y coordinates. These coordinates are very important because, for example, the amount of red in the map represents a shift along the X-axis on the canvas. Using the correct terminology, red is called the U channel, and it represents the horizontal U coordinate on the canvas. In practice, this means that the more red we have, the further to the right we go. A similar concept applies to green. It represents the Y coordinate, or in correct terminology, green is called the V channel and represents the vertical V coordinate on the canvas. This means that the more green we have, the further up we go. At the point where we have the maximum amount of red and green, what some people simply call yellow, we get the color from the top right corner. In contrast, the absence of red and green, sometimes called black, takes us to the bottom left corner of the canvas. And these features of the texture node, which allow us to work with 2D space, give a huge playground with a lot of possibilities. Okay, that's enough theory. Let's talk about more practical things. There is no single universal solution for how to make a proper red-green map or gradient canvas for the texture node. Everything depends on your imagination, experimentation, and software knowledge. So this is not a video where I show a step-by-step creation process, but rather a general guide based on my own experiments with some tips and tricks along the way. As I said before, you can get every project you see here for further investigation. My goal here is to share the knowledge I have so you can experiment with gradients more confidently yourself. So generally speaking, the process can be divided into three major parts. The first one is creating a red-green map. The second is blurring the map in some places. This step helps create the illusion that the scene is not made of separate pieces, but rather a fused, boiling composition. The third part is creating a gradient canvas and choosing colors. So first, let's look at this project. The idea behind it is to have 2 points and make the ellipse go out of focus as the points move apart. Spoiler alert, there are actually 3 ellipses that help create this effect. 2 of them are part of the red-green map, as you can confirm further down the flow. By the way, their positions are controlled by the points. The third ellipse neutralizes the intensity inside the circle. Without it, the map would have a yellow spot in the middle, which would ruin the whole effect. Actually, while recording this video, I started to realize that this project has a lot of rudimentary parts, leftovers from my early experiments. For example, we don't need any blue color here. The texture node just ignores it. Also, here we don't need these two nodes that change luminance to red and green. The custom tool does the same job. And the last one, we also don't need those nodes, as I can choose the right channel directly in the Very Blur node. Okay, now the project looks much cleaner. And if you're wondering what the hell the TwoColor node is and where it comes from, it's my own macro, also available for free in the same pack as the GradientColor macro. I have a bit of an obsession with the tint effect in After Effects, so I created something similar for DaVinci Resolve. With it, I can quickly colorize any channel from an input. For example, here I take the alpha channel and convert it into a black and white image. Yeah, I know this can be done in other ways, but when I'm prototyping something, I just slap this macro here and there without thinking too much about it. That also explains why I had so many of them at the beginning. So I have these two ellipses, and when the distance between them increases, they become more blurred. How in the name of Dumbledore did I make this? In the ellipse node, we have a soft edge control, which increases blurriness, and it is connected to one of the number controls in the assistant node. Here is that control. The expression inside converts the difference between the two positions into a linear length. So when that length increases, it increases the soft edges of the ellipses too. And about the formula, I don't want to give a whole geometry lecture here, especially since this isn't the only formula in this project. It's enough to say that ChatGPT is the right tool for these types of questions. Next, we have Very Blur nodes for each of the ellipses. They help create these nice shadows when the points are close to each other. In general, Very Blur nodes are very useful for creating these types of gradient effects. They blur the input based on the map you provide. In this example, I use one map for both nodes. This one is set to the red channel, while the other one is set to the green. Using the same map with different channels eliminates the need to duplicate the setup. The blur map also reacts to the point's positions, and as you can see, it has an extra distance on both sides. I calculate this extra distance by taking the normalized vector between the points and multiplying it with the ellipse width. The formula can be found in the map modifiers right here. As you can see, this project looks simple from the outside, but it is heavily dependent on expressions. Compared to this, other projects aren't so scary. Let's take a look at the setup we have there. This project is based on a 3D scene of two rotated cubes. And if we check the render node, it turns out that the output for this is a completely empty scene. Just kidding, we're exporting the normal and world position channels here. And this is a good moment to talk about the viewport and what information we send between nodes, because I think many confusions and misunderstandings when working with Fusion come from not knowing this basic information. So the viewport is just a tiny window that does not show all the information. It's like your eyes can't see radio waves, magnetic fields, etc. In the same way, the viewport is limited to a certain range of values and channels it can display. But as you may notice here, the values of red, green, and blue go above and below 0. Nodes can process this information because they work with numbers and channels, not with the colors you see through the viewport. And this is what I'm doing here, normalizing and redirecting the channels where I need them to be. Here, for example, I extract the normals and merge them with the Y and Z positions to finally get the result I want. Just to be clear, ignore the blue channel here because remember, the texture node doesn't work with blue. This is a better representation of what the node actually takes. But I prefer to skip this step of eliminating the blue channel because it makes the node tree messier and, in general, it doesn't bother me enough to worry about it. Next, with these three nodes, I create a depth map based on the Z position, which is finally used in the Very Blur node to create the out-of-focus effect. The setup might seem simple, and honestly, it is. Just some channel adjustments and redirections. The setup here is even simpler. I have a capsule and two radial gradients, which, after a few tweaks, create this image. And at this point, you may say,
"Wait a minute. You use the custom tool so extensively and never explain it."
And I can only answer, you should use it too. It's an incredible tool. And if you're not sure how it works, you should fill that knowledge gap as soon as possible. In many cases, it should replace the channel booleans node, because I don't know about you, but for me, it's much faster to type a few symbols for each channel than to choose something from a long drop-down menu. The custom tool also allows seemingly difficult tasks to be handled with a simple math expression. Here is a bright example of it. I need this light ring to have half of its brightness outside the capsule. And if we look at the formula, we take the ring color and subtract the capsule's alpha channel from it. As a result, we get a black hole in the middle. Dividing by 2 reduces the brightness. And this max function prevents values from going below 0. Remember, the viewport will not show it, but nodes can work with colors darker than black. In this example, we do not want that. Next, inside the capsule, I want the ring to also have 50% of its brightness. But outside the ring, the brightness should increase to 100%. So I take the capsule's alpha channel and subtract half of the ring color from it. Because it's subtraction, the darkness in the gradient doesn't change the white color too much. And a bright ring decreases the white by half. Then I sum these two expressions and export them to the channels. I do exactly the same operation for a different gradient. And finally, I redirect the results to the red and green channels. The blur setup is very simple. I have this gradient as a map for the very blur node, and one extra blur node just to soften the edges of the capsule. By the way, the length of this gradient is controlled by this rectangle, which results in a nice grid effect. Finally, let's talk about a gradient canvas. Probably the simplest thing you can do is slap a 4-corner gradient into the texture node. But in general, the process of creating a canvas is based on playing with background nodes, fast noises, merging them in different ways. And a quick tip, use a blur node to smooth the color blending in your gradient. At some point, I realized that if I make the gradient canvas seamless, I can offset and scale the UVs in the texture node, which opens the door to creating quick, simple, and at the same time impressive gradient animations. As you can see, even this primitive pink frame can do the job. I made it using a rectangle with soft edges and a simple pink background. And you can see this frame as a nice shine effect in the final result. Awesome, right? Here's another pro tip. Never underestimate final color correction. Look, this is without color correction, and this is after. And it is just the effect of a simple brightness contrast node. In this project, I made a more complex frame. It still has a rectangle with soft edges as a mask, but instead of a solid color, I used a cross gradient. I also mask the edges in the fast noise to keep the canvas seamless. In the end, I have a final short tutorial for you. It will be about creating such controls in the viewport. And as an example, I will use this project. First, create a custom tool and rename it to Controls. Then select the texture node and, using expressions, connect the U and V scale to the number controls in our new node. Do the same thing for the offset, but connect it to a point control. I also multiply the values by 3 to make the controls more responsive. Now, in the Controls node, check if everything is connected. By the way, check if Show Controls in the viewport is enabled. Now, to modify a control, right-click on it and select Edit Control. The visibility in the viewport is managed through this menu. It has many options depending on the type of control you want to modify. For this example, I will keep the crosshair control, but change its style to diagonal. As you can see, our style has changed. Also, since we modified the control, it dropped to the bottom. Let's also hide the other point controls, so we don't see them in the viewport. Now let's repeat the process for the number controls. Once again, right-click and choose Edit Control. This time, I want the control to be in the shape of a rectangle. The first number control, or U-scale, will be controlled by the width of the rectangle. I also want the rectangle to move with my point control, so I choose it from the menu. Click OK, and we start to see the width of the rectangle in the viewport. Repeat the process for the second control. Again, choose the rectangle control. Then, it's very important to change the group to 1, because we need this control to form a pair with the width. Once again, choose the point in 1 as the center. And don't forget, this time, instead of width, choose height. And when I clicked OK, I ran into a bug. The height didn't appear at first. It only started working after I slightly changed the control from the menu. And that's how it's done. I mean, the whole gradient effect. I really hope this video wasn't overwhelming, boring in some parts, or useless for you. I hope there was something you didn't know, and that I didn't waste your time. And if you're watching this video from the distant future, check out the description, because it's quite possible I'll make more projects using this technique. The description of this video will be a small place for me to share links to my work, if you don't mind. Thank you for watching, and goodbye.